And I will turn it over to you, Nick.
Thank you. Morning, everybody. This is our somewhat annual landscape workshop. I know last year we did not follow through because of the COVID deal. So this is the first one we're doing online like this, but we'll give it a try here. I'm going to do a presentation on the surface impervious surface mitigation options that you have, and then Josie and Faye and have some presentations for you as well, and Julie. So I'm just going to jump right into it. This is the agenda. This is the order that we're going to go in. So we covered this back in 2017 if you were at the training session back then, but in 2016, in the fall of 2016, Walworth County adopted new rules and regulations about near shore development. This was a statewide, state mandated shoreline zoning change, where we now have limits on the total amount of impervious surface on those near shore properties. They apply to anyone that's a waterfront property. They also apply to anybody who maybe isn't waterfront, but the entirety of their lot is within 300 feet of the water. So for example, we've got the 3 waterfront lots here. We've added a tool to try to help people on the Walworth County OneView GIS mapping application. We have this pink line, 300 feet, at least approximately 300 feet from the water as best as we could do. So waterfront properties, the impervious surface applies to them, and then parcels where the entirety of the lot is on the waterward side of that pink line. If somebody's part in and part not in, then those impervious surface rules do not apply to them. So like for this lot, for instance, there's a little bit of it here that isn't within 300 feet, so that lot is out. So what are the coverage limits? What I usually tell people is generically speaking, you get up to 15% of your lot to be covered. If you want to go over 15%, you can get up to 30%, but you have to offset that increase with a mitigation practice, which is what we're going to talk about for the majority of my presentation here. The DNR also gave us options of identifying highly developed shorelines, which we did take that option. And in Walworth County, we actually have quite a lot of highly developed shorelines. So I don't know if it's a 50-50 breakdown, but we'll get into that a little more. But on highly developed shorelines, the jumping off point, you can go up to 30% without any mitigation, and you can get up to 40% with mitigation. And then commercial is allowed to be slightly higher than residential, or quite a bit higher than residential. So to help identify highly developed shorelines, we've on the OneView interactive map, there is a bold red line at the shoreline if it's a highly developed shoreline. It becomes much easier to determine if you zoom in, but this is a zoomed out view to just kind of give you an idea of the kind of the percentage of coverage. I believe Delavan Lake, we ended up with the entire lake because of the sewer made it able to be deemed highly developed shoreline, but there was a number of different things that made something potentially a highly developed shoreline, and sewer was one of them. There was some census data was another one, and then what the lot sizes were and how much development had already taken place also came into play. So you can look at your properties that you're working with, see if they're on a highly developed shoreline, see if they're within 300 feet of the lake, and know where kind of what you're dealing with. So if they want to go over their 15 or 30%, whatever they're allowed outright, they would have to then do mitigation to earn additional percentage points of impervious surface coverage. This is what that form looks like. So it just kind of breaks down how many, the mitigation practice gets you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points. That gets you how many ever percentage that is. You can, if you need to, select more than one to get up to the number that you're trying to get up to. So this list here of mitigation measures is what I'm going to cover, because a lot of people ask us, well, what's this mean? Some of them are pretty straightforward, but we're going to touch on all of them here. And one thing before we go any further, that if you haven't dealt with this at all yet, if you're working on these properties that are in this near shore area, any impervious surface that you add to these properties, even if it's a retaining wall that's, 150 feet from the lake shore on a lake lot, that is an increase of impervious surface. And in the past, a lot of these impervious surfaces that were more than 75 feet from the lake, from a zoning standpoint, we often didn't care about. We often didn't need a permit for them or anything. But now we should be taking all of that stuff into consideration. So I'm just going to go through these in the order that they appear on the list here for the most part. So within 35 feet of the lake is the primary buffer, with the exception of the view access corridor that's cleared for the stairs or the access to the pier or the view from the house. That first 35 feet is the primary buffer, where theoretically it's relatively vegetated already. Obviously in Walworth County, with all the development we've had over the years, a lot of our properties have no primary buffer anymore. But this first option gives you the option of basically earning points by adding additional depth to that buffer. So if you wanted to start at 35 and if you went from 35 feet back an additional 5 feet, you'd earn additional points, and you could keep going back and keep adding additional feet and keep adding more points as you went there. So beyond 35 feet, between 35 and 75, adding vegetation paralleling the shoreline, basically, with the exclusion of the view access corridor area. That's option one. The other option is to add vegetation between 35 feet and 75 feet, but doing it perpendicular to the shore. If that works out better for folks, I mean, some vegetation is better than no vegetation, and we want people to have options, and we want them to, we would rather they put vegetation in that they're going to be happy with and that's going to be successful long term, and that they're not going to end up wanting to remove in the future anyway. So just to try to give more options, you can go parallel, you can go perpendicular. Another option, so I should mention all of these things for the most part end up being recorded on the deed of the property. If they plant vegetation and in return are getting additional impervious surface, that vegetation has to stay there for as long as that impervious surface is going to stay there, which theoretically is a relatively long time. So that gets put on the deed of the property, and that they can't just change their mind and take the vegetation out a couple years down the road. So they can add a deed restriction to the property to reduce the amount of view and access corridor that they're allowed. Somebody normally outright is allowed to have up to 35% of their lakeshore be cleared through that primary buffer to a maximum of 35% of their shoreline frontage. So if somebody wanted to reduce that that allowance voluntarily as part of a mitigation practice, they could do that. Shore yard lighting, one of the changes that the legislature made was communities can't regulate shore yard lighting, at least residential shore yard lighting. So if a person wants to, we never did anyway, but being that it was something that they made mandatory to allow it, we thought we'd give folks the option of using it as a mitigation practice to voluntarily not do it. A lot of people do not like lighting in general, and you can see in this example, you know, that shore yard lighting is relatively bold there. So if folks don't have their native buffer anymore, their shore yard buffer, they can earn points by replacing that there. So this is similar to our first example, but instead of being between 35 and 75, it's between the shoreline and the 35-foot setback. And I would say you don't have to necessarily start right at the shoreline and go back from there if, given the terrain of the land or something like that, it worked out better to start at 20 feet and go towards the house from there, or they already had some vegetation but not all of it. This is just a generic slide there, but a given property might lend itself to a little different, you know, the same mitigation measure, but it might look somewhat different. This one sometimes works out for people that they can increase their shore yard setback again on the deed. So then their setback for their lot, rather than being 75 or whatever their shore yard setback is, if they're in a situation where they can shore yard average, if folks want to voluntarily increase their shore yard setback, they can earn mitigation points that way. Sometimes that works well for people when, just given their terrain or their particular situation, they had no desire to crowd the minimum setback anyway. That one sometimes can be an easy one. You folks will know what these plants all are better than me. I just grabbed this off of the internet. So if people have retaining walls and they want to shield them with native vegetation, they can do that. So I have no idea if this is native vegetation or what this is, but you get the idea. You plant vegetation to screen the retaining walls, you can earn points with that. Removing retaining walls, if you get a point for every 100 square feet of face area of retaining walls that you remove. So if you can have an area where you can do something else to stabilize that slope, re-slope it or vegetate it in such a way that you don't need the wall anymore, that would be an option. Having DNR approved riprap or vegetated shore treatment. This too is something that a lot of folks just already have. So it sometimes can be used for some easy mitigation points. This one seems to be the layup that a lot of people use, just having a code compliant septic system that's newer than 1980. In addition to having a code compliant septic, part of having a code compliant septic system is also being current on your mandatory pumping. So the county has we are required by the state to make sure people pump their septics or inspect their septics at least once every 3 years. So, or you've got folks on the lakes, a lot of them have holding tanks. So they're reporting annually their holding tank maintenance. As long as someone's got a relatively modern septic system and they're current with their pumping, they would be code compliant. think the idea of the mitigation was to encourage people to replace older, maybe not up to code or failing septic systems. And a lot of the people we deal with are replacing their house when they're doing their mitigation. So they're doing this kind of by default anyway. So again, a lot of people reach for this one as some easy points. Installing a rain garden. This one is one that a lot of people have to look to, if, especially if they're on a sewered lot and they're not waterfront. So some of these sewered lots that are entirely within 300 feet of the lake, but they're not waterfront, so they can't, some of these options, they don't have the option of using because they can't plant vegetation at the shoreline or agree to not have shore yard lighting or something like that because they don't have the, they're not riparian property owners. This is one that folks can use. And this is basically putting in a rain garden on the property. The DNR has on their website this guide for homeowners and landscapers on how to size rain gardens, depth and area, and so on. This link here is on the Land Conservation Department's application for this kind of thing. So there's a link right to this booklet. It's pretty, if you haven't ever looked at this booklet, it's got a lot of nice graphics and things. If you're interested in doing these, that you could maybe share with landowners. It's pretty informative, I thought. So there was a time when people were allowed to put in sand beaches, and if they have one, they're allowed to maintain them. So if they want to voluntarily remove them and revegetate them, they can earn points that way. Obviously, where this sand is here, we don't have vegetation at the shoreline. Inevitably, all that sand ends up washing into the lake, and then they go and dump more sand on the beach, which again washes into the lake, and away we go. So some of the lakes, these beaches seem to be more commonplace than others. But if folks have one of those beaches, they have that option. This is another one that actually earns quite a lot of points, and the legislature, as part of their changes back around this, when this was all happening, counties cannot or counties have to allow people to have a boathouse. So Walworth County, these are dry boathouses, by the way, and Walworth County had always allowed boathouses for folks that had properties that were relatively flat. If you had slopes less than 12%, we'd allow you to have a boathouse. But when the law changed, now everyone's allowed a boathouse. So even on these really steep slopes, folks can potentially get a boathouse. So if a property owner wants to deed restrict their property that they'll never have a boathouse, they can earn mitigation points. I've dealt with several people that just feel like a boathouse for them, for their site, just isn't practical anyway, even though they're allowed one. So this is something that they felt would work for them. Some of the other ones that were either relatively straightforward or didn't lend themselves to their own slide. You're allowed to have an access to the shoreline. There are some properties out there that have multiple accesses to the shoreline, 2 sets of stairs or a staircase and a tram or something like that. If they have 2 accesses to the shoreline and they want to remove one of them, they can earn points. Roof runoff collection system, that might be a rain garden, but it might also be some other type of collection system. I don't know that we've done many of or any of those actually. No grade change within 75 feet of the ordinary high water mark. we don't allow grade changes within 75 feet of the ordinary high water mark. So that's for a lot of people an easy grab. But a lot of these lots have already had their shore yard area grade manipulated, so they wouldn't qualify for that one. But folks that want to maybe restore a manipulated shore yard area, they might be able to get points for this and for removing retaining walls or something like that to kind of restore it back to natural again. Preserve existing permanent native buffer. There again, we don't allow you to remove it anyway, but very few people anymore have it. So I guess it's just another, if it works for your particular situation, there's another option for you. Other method approved by the Land Use and Resource Management Department to be determined based on proposal and impacts, how many points you would get. I don't know that we've had anyone do that yet. When we were making this list, you know, we were trying to come up with as many options as we could for folks, and we included that there just in case someone had a great idea that we didn't come up with. So I'm including this in here because we have some new staff. Lindsay Smith was hired less than a year ago now, I think, and she is doing both zoning and sanitation. Lindsay had been working doing zoning and sanitation in Jefferson County for a couple of years before coming to Walworth County. So she's helping Rick with the sanitation stuff, and she's also helping us with the zoning stuff. And so there is all the current workload distributions for everybody in the office. So that is all I have. If anyone's got any questions, I can see if I can answer them. Otherwise, we can do the questions at the end as well. Julie, I don't know if I can see comments as they come in or if I have to stop sharing.
If anything comes into the chat, I can certainly read it off too.
Okay. I don't have anything further. If there's no questions, we can go on to Faye. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Sounds good. Faye, why don't you get loaded, and if a question comes up, we can answer it, and we can also, you know, we'll have time at the end too.
Am I sharing?
Yep, just switch your display setting.
Uh-oh. Which one is that?
Up at the top, where you have to swap your presenter view. Yep. Looks good.
Thank you. Is that good? All right. Well, good morning. Hey, it's nice to be back talking about our conservation programs and educating you, informing you about landscaping techniques and methods and the rules and regulations. But all that Nick informed you about and told you about for mitigation, to me, it's all about landscaping. And the sooner you can work with some of these property owners that need to do mitigation, I think the more successful everybody would be. So I've always said it's so important when somebody's doing development on a lot, on a lake or anywhere else, it's so beneficial to have the landscaper involved from day one. And I know many of you have asked for that because you get put into a construction site kind of at the end, and you have a mess to deal with. You know, folks didn't think about how to get to the lake shore when they have this massive house with no access, to do a lot of the landscaping, cleanup, and all of the features that a property owner wants to put in. And even with these new mitigation measures that are required, it is so important to have the landscape team in on day one, with the builder and the landowner, so that you can consult with these property owners about the best option for the site, learn about what type of plants these property owners would like to see on their properties, what kind of uses. I can't tell you how important it is to have the landscape contractor in on day one before the earth is turned. And we try and work on this with when the builder or a property owner comes into our office before they've applied for any permits and they're reviewing their development plan. I think the first thing out of my mouth is, who is your landscaper? And if they don't have one, a local landscaper, we share the list of landscapers with them. Those that attend our workshops get put on this list. And in fact, on our applications now, we ask for who the landscaper is. And if they don't have one, we give them a certain amount of days to get a landscaper and a landscaping plan into the conservation office. So, hey, I'm with you guys. I understand kind of the difficulties you have when you get called in and they've already done 9 months of compaction out on the site. And so we're trying to at least educate and encourage people to get their landscaping team in early on their project. So what I'm going to talk to you about are rain gardens. Most of you probably know more about building a rain garden and selecting plants for rain gardens than I do, but I want to go through some new technical standards that are at your disposal and talk about some site considerations, etc. Just so you know, this is my rain garden. We put in our rain garden about 3 years ago, and it is just amazing. So I've become a real promoter of using this landscape feature on properties, not only to achieve mitigation points if a property owner needs them, but just because they're kind of cool. There is a nationwide revival, should say, to establish rain gardens on properties for a number of reasons, mainly because of new stormwater standards. So a rain garden, what is it? It's a shallow depressed area in the landscape that collects rainwater from a roof, driveway, or the street and allows it to soak into the ground. And the preference is to plant it with a diversity of native plants, but I'm not a purist. And if you look at this rain garden here, it's got daylilies in it. So it's the preference is native plants with their deep roots, but not necessary. In fact, I think if folks, they have plants that they can't live without in their yard, and they want to put them in their rain garden, so be it, as long as they're not aggressive and invasive and crowd everything out. But there is no reason why some plants that are that are non-native can't be included in a rain garden. Rain gardens have a purpose. They enhance stormwater infiltration. They can capture pollutants that are carried in stormwater, recharge the groundwater, slow runoff that reduces drainage problems, and mitigate runoff close to its origin. That's why you want to keep it close to your house, the downspouts, so that you're confining runoff, and provide great habitat for birds and pollinators. Our rain garden gets tons of butterflies because we have a lot of milkweed in it, and they also provide beauty to the landscape. Rain gardens have several components. It's a ponding area. There's a ponding depth. There's a berm, potentially. If you're on a slope, you'd create a berm to contain that ponding area. Usually a downslope edge, that could be the berm, and then a planting bed. An overflow device is optional. I don't have one in our rain garden. And then of course, plants. A rain garden only applies to a small drainage area, and they're best suited to receive from small rooftops or other impervious surfaces. Our rain garden, we have just one downspout that takes just a quarter of our rooftop, and we get a little bit of our driveway that is draining into the rain garden. They only can be used where your soil conditions are suitable. You want to not have clay soils. Bedrock is not an issue in Walworth County, but high groundwater conditions are. So, analyzing the soil conditions is really important when you're designing the rain garden. And they're not a sediment control practice. If you're on a new construction site, those shouldn't be put in place when you've got the area all torn up and subject to erosion and sediment gets into the rain garden. So they're not a sediment control practice. And they shouldn't be used in areas like for driveways where they're going to use a lot of salt and also snow storage. We don't use salt on our driveway, so this is perfect to take a little, for our case, to take a little bit of the runoff from our driveway. Technical standards, there's really two guides that include technical standards for rain gardens. One is again, that's our rain garden there. There's which Nick talked about, the rain gardens for homeowners and landscapers. And this is a DNR publication, which you can get on the DNR website. We also have a link to it on our website. And there is the new technical standard, which is DNR has a number of technical standards for construction site erosion and for post-construction stormwater management. This technical standard is a part of their post-construction stormwater management. This version just came out a couple years ago. It was developed by a state, what we call technical advisory committee that included DNR, contractors, and county municipal employees, county employees, that came up with this technical standard that is a little more, if you're using a rain garden to meet local stormwater management standards, then this is the technical standard that you would use to design your rain garden. Talk a little bit about site criteria that are in both the technical standard for homeowners and the more sophisticated technical standard. It goes through a number of site considerations when you're planning a rain garden: setbacks, soil limitations, slopes, drainage areas, trees, erosion issues, utilities, and septic systems. So there are setback requirements for a rain garden. For example, building foundations with a full basement, the rain garden should be set back 10 feet from those foundations. If you just have a frost footing, then 5 feet would be acceptable setback distance. Wells, it ranges from 8 to 25 feet. You should check with the regulatory agent. That might be the DNR private well person to determine whether or not you can be 8 feet or 25 feet from the regulatory agent. That means that when you go out to a site or you're planning a site before anything, is developed on a parcel, you need to ask where is the well or where is the well going, so you can properly place the rain garden and meet that setback. Septic system, it's 5 feet. Again, I asked, you should check with either Rick Dorgay on our staff, or if you're working in another county, the county sanitarian. The sanitary sewer, you need to check with the, if there is one like Delavan, you need to check with the Delavan Lake Sanitary District to see. Definitely it shouldn't be, if it's going to be within their easement, they're going to need to check off on that, or within their sanitary sewer, you always want to check with the Delavan Lake Sanitary District to see if they have a setback. Roads, I had one rain garden, I think I showed you, or I will show you, that is near the road. So you want to check with your local jurisdiction to see if it's within the road right of way, or if there needs to be approval from the town or state or the county about the location of a rain garden. Obviously utilities, I'm sure you all check those locations when you're doing any of your landscaping, but it is particularly important for a rain garden because you are digging down. And also a rain garden shouldn't be on any slope that it's steeper than 8:1. Soil conditions, I'm going to show you in one of the technical standards, well, both of the technical standards, there is a procedure to determine what the soil texture is on site. And also the more sophisticated technical standard actually shows you how to do a on-site infiltration test. I think around Walworth County and particularly around the lakes, you should also be recognize any high groundwater that may exist. Hopefully, the builder has thought about that with their development of the house or any structures or additions, but you ought to be aware of it too when you're planning your rain garden. This is the in the DNR Technical Standard 1009, the more sophisticated version of the rain garden technical standard. There is a flow chart that you can use to determine soil texture of your site. And then there's also in the technical standard, there is a sizing for your rain garden based on the type of soil texture that you have and the ponding depth, and the giving you this infiltration rate. So there's all sorts of really good design assistance that are in these technical standards that you can use. Drainage limitations. Again, this is our rain garden. This is when we first started building it. You want a maximum drainage area to a rain garden. The impervious surface cannot exceed 3,000 square feet. And for all surfaces, so you have pervious surfaces and impervious surfaces, you don't want that drainage area to exceed 5,000 square feet. So those are some limitations that you should be aware of. Ponding depth, you don't want the ponding depth to exceed 8 inches. Some say this one here is 8 to 12. I say 8 inches, unless you've got some berming on this, but you want that to be 8 inches at the maximum. The planting bed, these are just some things I pulled out that should be considered. The planting bed should be as flat as possible. You should select Wisconsin hardy plants, and you probably already know that. The native species are preferred, but not, again, non-natives may be used, non-native perennials. Deep-rooted species that will enhance the infiltration. Particularly if you have some clay or there's been some compaction, You need to do some compaction mitigation, but those deep-rooted plants will keep that infiltration open, and will provide some infiltration in your rain garden, which is important. Again, use a diversity of plants. You don't want to have one plant, because when it dies, they all die, right? And then I've noticed in our rain garden, we probably put a little bit too much mulch in it. So I'm kind of taking out mulch um, uh, every year, because I still think we still have too much in it. So um, my husband is really loves mulch, so he mulches everything. But I've been pulling the mulch out of the, because you get, dead plants in there. So you want to get as much as that mulch out of the rain garden. There's a lot of great guides. I'm not going to talk about plants. I mean, you can go to Agrical's um, uh, brochure, their plant list, and they've got rain garden mixtures in there, as well as we get our plants from a number of sources, and they all have rain garden mixes that you can buy, or you can, put your own together based on what your client desires, what colors the client wants in the rain garden. Again, the homeowner's guide is applicable when you're using a rain garden as a mitigation measure, and also when it's desired as a landscape feature. We have a statewide effort, and have launched this effort in the county as the Healthy Lakes Initiative, where there are funds available for landowners that establish a number of landscape features on their lakefront property, like native buffers. But one of the features is a rain garden. And like in the Lake Geneva area, the Lake Geneva Conservancy is offering funds to property owners that establish these water quality friendly landscaping features like buffers and rain gardens. So this is the manual that's used for rain gardens when they're need to meet a mitigation practice, or people just want to do it, or when it's a healthy lakes practice being funded by the state of Wisconsin. Nick went over this. Here's the mitigation points that a property owner can get if they establish a rain garden. So 3 points. We use the DNR technical standard for rain gardens when a rain garden is planned to treat runoff from an impervious surface. And then that impervious surface doesn't get counted in the calculation for the impervious surface. And again, remember I said no more than 3,000 square feet can be treated in a rain garden. So if that impervious surface wants to be omitted from the impervious surface calculation by treating the runoff from that impervious surface, this is the technical standard that needs to be used to design that rain garden. So the shoreline regulations allow the impervious surface to be excluded. Not only does the rain garden technical standard, the more sophisticated one, need to be used in the design, we also have performance standards that we are treating 1/2 of the runoff discharging from the impervious surface in that rain garden. So there's some math that needs to be done when you're using a rain garden as a stormwater management practice to treat the runoff from the impervious surface. A rain garden, or many of the mitigation practices, need to be implemented according to county conservation standards and require a county conservation plan approval. This is the application that you would fill out. and there is a fee for the review of this. And this would cover rain gardens, the native buffers, those that are parallel or perpendicular to the shore. It would cover a roof collection system, permeable pavement, if that is a measure that you're going to use, and also the shielding of the retaining walls would need to have a conservation plan approval. So this is the application that you would fill out. I do recommend that you always make an appointment with either Josie or me to review the conservation plan requirements and the application and review procedure. Let's talk about maintenance. Now, Nick did mention that when you mitigation practice is selected, it does get recorded. And there is a maintenance requirement. So a maintenance plan should be developed. This is a requirement of our review of the conservation plan. So the rain garden should have a maintenance plan that's done. And that should be a written plan that's given to the property owner. And hopefully the property owner hires you to do the maintenance. If you're doing the maintenance of other landscape features on the property, then maybe the rain garden would need to be inspected at least 3 times during the growing season to note weeds, erosion, excess moisture, or other failure. Weeding, cutting, and removing any nuisance and invasives, and replacing any dead plants. And then there might be making sure that there is infiltration occurring in the rain garden. If the rain garden retains water for more than 72 hours, there's soil compaction mitigation may need to be, they may be needed on the rain garden. So you don't want that water to sit there for more than 72 hours. There should be a drawdown time of that water. So that's kind of the key, 72 hours. That shouldn't be any ponding in that rain garden. So the conservation checklist for a rain garden, we do have a separate sheet for each of the mitigation practices that list what needs to be in the conservation plan. This is the one for the rain garden. And then I want to talk about construction and some of the issues that may occur. And I think the worst is compaction. Particularly when a rain garden is selected as a mitigation practice for a new construction site, a new house going in, that rain garden should be corded off just like mounds are corded off for septic system. So to make sure that the native soil is protected, where you did your soil test and found this ideal site for a rain garden, that footprint should be protected so there's no heavy equipment in the rain garden. Delay construction of the rain garden when soils are not wet. I think I said wet, but delay construction of the rain garden when soils are wet. So yeah, shouldn't be out there digging when there's wet soils, because that'll cause also some compaction. And don't use heavy equipment in the planting bed. We built ours with hand tools and did not have any mini excavator out there, because these are small landscape features. They're not huge features, and they certainly can be built with hand tools. So that's kind of the whole skinny on rain gardens. And I know many of you have built some rain gardens throughout the county and are doing excellent jobs. We have some really fine examples out there. But I wanted to now talk about, it's not in the title, but some invasive species that the county is focusing on this year. And we have some training coming up on the 30th that maybe you want to tune into, that Julie Hill is sponsoring on the Tuesday, the 30th, I have a flyer that I'll put up on the screen on that, but we're focusing on 3 invasives. I know there's many others, but we thought if we could help landowners and contractors and municipal employees, like those that work in the highway department, identify these 3, the locations of them, and how to report them to either the county or the DNR, it would be important. So we're looking at lesser celandine, the Japanese knotweed here, and then Phragmites. These are the 3. There's a nice flyer that the Extension Service and the DNR, and the Geneva Lake Conservancy and Environmental Agency put together on lesser celandine. This has been found in the Geneva Lake area. It's a buttercup. It comes up right away. Could be seen right now. I haven't been out looking for this, but Snake Road, there was a lot of buttercup, a lot of this lesser celandine around the lake. And then last year it was discovered around Whitewater Lake. So we're making an aggressive effort to train people on what it looks like, and to identify, log in where the location is, and to report it to the DNR. This is the Japanese knotweed. It also has been discovered up by Whitewater, and then Phragmites. I'm seeing a lot of this in stormwater management, in wet detention basins. Again, there's a native Phragmites, and then there's this invasive one. So there is training. This is the one that Julie is sponsoring on March 30th, from 10 to 11. I hope that all of you can tune into this workshop to talk about identify. It's really good. There's already been one of these sessions held, and gives you a really good overview of how to identify these invasive 3 invasive species and how to report them to the DNR. So hopefully you guys can tune into that. This is a rain garden next to the road that I think I wanted to show you to make sure that you contact your local road superintendent or highway department to make sure that this would be an okay landscape feature next to the road. And I just wanted to do one little pep talk here. There's people, out there that I want to establish a rain garden, and these are the people that I find are a pleasure to work with. This is something that they really want to do on their property, or the same is true with a native buffer. And then there's the other folks that I must decide, this is something I chose because I had to, or I have to do this because it's a stormwater measure. So I must establish a rain garden. I think that those that want to do it are more successful. Nick talked about this, but the ones that need to gain points will likely have unsuccessful rain gardens. And it's, I guess, up to us, the regulatory agency, or us, where the conservation office, and you, to really sell this so that the landowner accepts it and maintains it, and learns to love it. And that's why I'm not a purist with the native plants. I mean, if there is something, a plant that one of your clients remembers from their grandmother's garden, or it's a particular color that matches their house, so be it. Put it in the rain garden, put it on the landscape, put it in the buffer, as long as it's not going to be aggressive, and it's not invasive. If that's what it takes to get a property owner to love their landscape feature, to love their rain garden, to love their buffer, let's do it. I know Lily of the Valley. I love Lily of the Valley. So in my, and it's so aggressive. I mean, it goes everywhere. but I have one bed that I just have lily of the valley, and that's all, we contain it in that one bed. So there's going to be, I've talked to property owners, and they always recall things in their grandmother's garden, and it's something ornamental, and I look it up and I say go for it if it's not invasive, and it's not going to be aggressive in the garden. Let them enjoy those plants that they remember, that are sentimental to them. So with that, I have nothing more to offer. I'll take any questions, but I really appreciate all of you that have tuned in today. And Josie and I are here to help you be successful with your planting plans and to do all we can to make these buffers and rain gardens successful and your clients happy. All right, who's next? I have to end my stop share.
I believe Nick and I are next. Would we like to take a quick 5-10 minute break? Okay, so let's meet back up at 9:40 and we'll continue on with what's new.
There, Josie?
Let's get going. I will share my screen and let's talk a bit about what's new.
Hey, do you want to mute so you don't pick up Josie's audio?
Okay, the mouse is being a little wacky here. All right, can everyone see my screen? Get a thumbs up. Okay. So I'm going to start off with what's new here. So starting at the beginning of this year, the county had updated our GIS to include some 2020 photo or new aerials, and they also updated our contours, so you can see both 1 and 5 foot contours now. I believe that the orange is the 1 foot, and you can see the purple will be the 5 foot here. So that's available to the public. You can access this on your own computer and select by tax key and see about what the grade is on your property. The next new thing that we should hit on is Heather Markwart in the zoning office designed the new shoreline vegetation removal exemption application. So it's just kind of an updated version of that form that you bring in if you had a client that needed to remove a tree because it's dead, dying, or diseased. So you still need to submit photos, a site plan showing where it's at, and possibly an arborist certification that it needs to go. But including that with your photos there. What goes hand in hand with that is our stump grinding permit application here. This, some of you may have seen already, but I thought I'd hit on it since we didn't get a chance to talk about it last year. So erosion control has updated some fees, and now we have included a stump grinding fee. So instead of applying for a $250 lake or waterfront landscaping permit, you can apply for a stump grinding permit. That's $25 a stump, but not to exceed $250. And it would go right with that exemption form. So you'd need the photos showing where the tree is and what kind of shape it's in. If it's within that 35 feet, proof that zoning has okayed it. And your stabilization methods easily checked right on here. So you're going to seed and mulch it, throw some sod over it, plant a brand new tree in its location, or maybe you had another way of stabilizing it you'd like to propose. So that is another new form. This link will bring it to our county website where you can download the form from. Our erosion control permit application for small sites just got a makeover as well. I've only included the first page of it here. I'll touch more on some of the other pages in my next presentation, but we have kind of modeled our form here to show the different projects that people have been doing to mirror what the fees for them would be. So we would get less confusion on what you're actually going to be charged for a permit. And we have a little more information on the front that instead of hunting around for what your proposed project entails, we can kind of just see it right from the beginning. So we know you're doing a patio and a fence or whatever it may be. So that is available on our website now too as a fillable form. And then we've got our new erosion control fee schedule here. So like I was saying before, it kind of mirrors what our application looks like. So these should all be in the same place. If you're going for landscaping and other land disturbing activities, which many of you do, all of these options, so pond construction, retaining walls, driveway, parking area, that is all on this application in the same order here. So if you're working on a waterfront property and it's under 10,000 square feet, it's going to be $250 for that. And non-waterfront follows the same method. And if you ever have a question on what the fee will be before you submit, phone calls are always free, so give us a ring. And I think that about sums it up for what's new right now with the county. And if you ever have any questions, feel free to call us. So are there any questions at this time? Kind of breeze through that. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this one then. Nick, you're muted. Are you adding anything here?
I have nothing more to add.
Okay, perfect. Well, then I think I should move on to my next presentation.
Wait,
All right, close this one down. Where did it go? Okay. So the presentation I'm giving now will be on temporary and permanent stabilization. So this is something that you landscapers end up doing all the time for building contractors. And sometimes it's cleanup, and sometimes you're there from the beginning, which is what we definitely prefer. I'm going to show you some of the good that I see out there. Here's some stockpiles that were covered with some straw erosion control matting. And this house, I remember I had to hound them quite a bit to finally get stabilized, but they got some seed and some matting down here as well. Here's some of the bad. We can see some tracking coming from this site. They had an effort back here to stabilize their large amounts of land disturbance, but they didn't keep that tracking pad in place, and it caused some dirt to leave on their tires. And then this site on the bottom photo shows that they have no silt fence in place. They didn't bother with any stabilization at the end of the day, no tarping. And all I can picture is a nice rain or snow event that comes and makes this all soggy and causes muddy messes for down the road. And then we get the really ugly. So the bottom photo on the leftmost side is showing a spillage into the lake here. Somebody's silt fence down here, it failed, caused gravel and sand and dirt and debris to get washed right into the lake. It even froze on top, so when the DNR came out to inspect the site with us, they were just at a loss as well. So when sites aren't stabilized properly, it doesn't just cause a problem for the homeowner. It's an everybody problem. This site has been a detriment to the lake community, and now everyone has to deal with their consequences from one person's slip up here. Not to mention that it could be a financial burden as well to get that cleaned up and possible citations. The center photo I've shown here is showing somebody who had dug a nice pit. I believe this was a demo project. They had taken a house down and they had no silt fence, and nobody was out there stabilizing immediately. It's a very frustrating site to come upon. And then we've got our photo in the corner. And they had demoed as well. They have some wattles for sediment protection, but that little silk sock is not going to take out all the sediment here that could potentially wash down into the lake if they had gotten a rain event. Things like this, they need a more thought out plan than what was executed. And then we've got some yikes. This site was completely muddy. There was some obvious tracking onto the road as well, but this is something that can easily be avoided with better planning and better stabilization techniques. So our goals are prevent where you can, reduce what you can't prevent, mitigate when necessary, and then ultimately to establish this permanent stabilization that'll be beneficial for years to come. This photo is an example of a shoreline buffer. Although it's kind of narrow, it's something that the homeowners had put in place. It's protecting their shoreline. They've got some hard armor here, that riprap that was approved by the DNR, and they're working towards keeping all their soil on their site. This is kind of the end result. So with stabilization, we follow the DNR tech standards. So I have just a quick example down here of what the first page of the tech standard proceeding on a construction site looks like. This one, I believe, goes on for 3 pages. This link above goes directly to the DNR site where you can see all of the tech standards for the different stabilization techniques. So these are important to follow. We get a lot of people coming in and they say they're going to do temporary or permanent seeding, and then it's just, they throw some out there, they hope that it grows, and there's different things they can put in place to have it be more successful. For our permit application, as I had mentioned before, we had just recently updated this, showing a few more things. So this is just the first page. So if I move on here, this is our dreaded checklist. I get many phone calls a day of people needing me to walk them through what this all entails. But as landscapers, you guys have a better idea of what we're looking for here. But just these simple things for when going through and knowing the site better than we do, because hopefully you've been on site already and have photos and a better understanding of what's going to be necessary to keep the soil on the property. So going down this area here is stating all the things that will need to be shown on a site plan, no matter how small the project may be. And then some of the stabilization techniques coming down here. So are you using a vegetative buffer? If you are, do you have at least 25 feet of undisturbed vegetation in each direction of the site itself? Silt fence is not a temporary stabilization measure. That is a sediment measure, keeping the soil from running off the site. That's where that mitigation comes in. So if we can keep the soil in its location as it exists, that's even better. That's where that matting and straw and seed comes in place. So moving on here. So that's with our stabilization methods. These dates become very important to us. You start a project, but then how long is it going to take you? How long is the soil going to be exposed to erosion? So that's why we really hit home on this temporary stabilization portion of our permit application. So now we're looking for who's going to be doing it and what's their phone number. So when we're out on site and we see that somebody's been digging for a few weeks now, things are left bare, who can we call to get that rectified? And what is their plan for having it covered back up and keeping it from leaving their property? These are a few different ways of stabilizing temporarily. Doing that matting, there's coconut matting, there's straw matting, there's all kinds out there. We recommend people using that PALS list so that they can have a product that's going to be successful on the slopes they're trying to stabilize. And as far as permanent stabilization methods, the county does not consider a site to be stabilized until there is 70% growth of the vegetation on the site, if that's what we're looking at. If somebody's putting in a patio project, obviously you're not going to be hoping for 70% of grass to pop up through your concrete. So different methods for different projects here. Mulching. This can be a really great technique when you've got large areas to cover and matting's too expensive to cover. This project was many thousands of square feet. They did a seed mixture, which you can't see in this photo because it's kind of a zoomed out, but they threw down this straw and it was able, a few weeks later, I come out and they had quite a bit of grass popping up straight through the mulch. Now, I do see sites where people have mulch, like chip mulching, way too close to the shore. So then you get these rain events and now your mulch is washing straight into the lake. That's not a good scenario either. So we need to be kind of mindful of what techniques we're using and what location they're going into. And stabilizing as you go. I went onto this site and noticed that as they finished up the portion, instead of just saying, okay, we'll come back later and put that matting down, they had seen the benefits of doing all the work in sections. So if you're going to rip up a bunch of the grass and fix an area because they were putting in a new pathway here and it got rutted up, they were able to immediately put new grass seed back down and put that matting on top. Now this site is stabilized. This is protected from splash erosion if they got a big rainfall, and they would be in a much better situation than somebody who just left this as bare earth. You can see up here, they were still working. They were fixing up a patio and they had planned to finish it up by the end of the day. Here's another example of that erosion matting. This is a thicker product that they chose for a much steeper slope. They've got the entire matting sections stapled in. You can't really see that at the end here, but there was staples throughout it. They had the bale checks behind the silt fence itself. Different ways of keeping that soil in place. Now, seed and straw, this is a better photo showing that they had put down that seed mixture and straw on top, and you can start to see some of this new growth pop up. Let's see, and hydro seeding is always an option too. This works for a good temporary method. So if you're getting into some of those colder months, maybe if it doesn't even have the seed in it, it's just a poly application. You can keep that soil in its place and not have to worry about rain having your soil washed down into a waterway potentially. Tarps are fantastic for some of these smaller projects. These are all examples of tarped stockpiles, but I've come across people lately that are doing even a small, if they're doing an egress window, or smaller landscaping projects where you're disturbing a smaller area of land and you don't want to put up a whole silt fence because that is sometimes even more land disturbance than your project itself. An option is always to tarp at the end of the workday. You can protect against sediment leaving the property with a tarp, and you can protect against erosion, having it washed directly down too. So something to think about. I think tarps are cheap. People keeping them in their work trucks would be a great option for these smaller projects. And then landscaping plans. This is more on the permanent end. I know many of you that are listening in today make some very beautiful landscaping plans, and I enjoy reviewing them. But to keep things fair, I just took a couple from the DNR's Healthy Lakes and Rivers grant program to use as examples today. Looking for these native ways of protecting your lakeshore edge and stabilizing it permanently. The other added benefit to having these beautiful native plants on the water's edge is they're much better at holding water in. You're protecting the lake from possible fertilizer runoff, and they add habitat for all kinds of species. So beauty and function, adding these native ways of stabilizing. There's, like I said before, this grant program where you can apply through local lake districts if they're offering it. I know the Geneva Lake Conservancy has done many of these rain gardens and a few of these native buffers as well. It's something we're hoping to start up this year. You need a certain amount of interest before we apply for the grant for a project starting in 2022. So if you've got any clients that are interested in something like this, please be sure to contact me. And then this isn't so much of a stabilizing measure as construction waste. I am sure that you guys deal with this on sites when you're doing the cleanup duty for somebody who has just built a new house or patio. Concrete washout is terrible. We see it more than we'd like to, and this is not great for anybody. You see that they've truly just let the concrete wash everywhere, and it's a rather high pH, and it really is kind of just blocking any vegetative growth in this area. So getting that cleaned up and then encouraging your general contractors to be using these washout systems, whether it's a kiddie pool and they're just making sure they're not letting any waste go onto the sides here, or if they just haul it away with them. This is a DNR violation as well as a county one. So while you're out on sites, if you run across this, you know, getting that cleaned up properly, and the sooner the better. And our goal here is ultimately keeping your soil on your site. When you're doing these projects, if you do have something run into the lake, it's always better to call us first instead of just asking for forgiveness later and hoping we don't catch it. So it's not only necessary, it's regulated, and it's in your best interest and the homeowners. So wondering if there's any questions at this point.
Josie, Miles Glickman here.
Oh,
Thank you. Is there a template of any kind for the color guide used in your planning outlay regarding appropriate plants, so that when we submit it, like it's color coded and looks as best as we can towards those examples that are way better than I can draw?
As far as needing a specific color code, we don't have any requirements. It would just be a matter of noting how many plants you are proposing to put in that location so that we can check to make sure that it's going to be sufficient. Because if you have too few and they don't expand at all, then you're going to have bare earth that's subject to erosion as well. So I can definitely give you some technical guidance programs that we have here, these different tech guides that kind of help you along with planning your own landscaping plan.
That would be great. Thank you. Size wise, and like, yeah, I'm not like, give me crayons. I'm okay for that. Right,
Yeah, and I'm
thank you.
sure there's quite a few landscapers on this that if you were looking to contact somebody, there's quite a few qualified ones here. Anyone else?
There, it looks like there was one in the chat, Josie. I don't know if you can see that. Can you tell me when the more rigorous biotechnical note 1 comes into play? Is that just within the 35 feet?
Sure. So using that guidance, I'm going to pull that up quick too. We have conservation plan standards here. Let's see, where did I hide that? Okay, let's see if I can share this. Oop, this one. So this is kind of an outline of what our checklist looks like for a conservation plan, and how plantings need to be established within that 35. So that 35-foot setback. So scrolling down a bit here, we've kind of got a more general calculation here for the different plant densities. So this definitely needs to be followed for mitigation practices and any conservation plans proposed along the shoreline. We use these calculations just to ensure that there is going to be enough coverage to actually stop the erosion and not leave anything to slip into the lake. So that it's a great guide to use if you are even outside of that shoreline, making sure you've got the right densities and keeping it well vegetated. So I guess the answer to your question would be definitely within that 35 feet. But if you're doing these different stabilization measures and you're looking for kind of a check to make sure that it's going to be enough, then you could definitely utilize it then as well. Anything else?
There aren't any more questions. I think, Julie, you're next on the agenda.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to share my screen now. So hi, everybody. My name is Julie Hill. I'm a horticulture outreach specialist with UW-Madison Division of Extension, and I work for Rock and Walworth counties. So my work primarily is with consumer audiences, although the resources that I'm going to share with you today are applicable to you in the green industry and the clients and the residents and the property owners that you work with. I will say that a lot of the questions that I get and a lot of the information we share has to do with proper planting, proper siting, proper management. That all is going to help prevent those problems that we see in the landscape. Mostly during the season, during May to October, and even starting now, I'm getting a lot of questions about, not just vegetable gardens, but trees and things in the landscape and disease and insects and all sorts of things are questions I get about. Most of the problems we see are because things weren't planted properly. For example, trees are planted too deep, mulch is piled right up next to the tree trunk. Overwatering, improper watering, all these things cause problems down the road. So that's a lot of the information that I like to share. But at Extension, we have tons of information. We have information about choosing which landscape plants are good for a site. Not only disease questions and soil questions and all of that. So I'm going to share some resources that we have, and you can certainly contact directly if you have additional questions too. So one is diagnostic resources. And you may be familiar with these already, and I'll just kind of go through them, and these websites are really easy to get to, but the Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic is where we send samples, and we can also send photos, and people can send photos to me too to help identify plant diseases. And the big thing whenever we see a problem in the landscape is to identify what's wrong, what it is, and then we can determine what the course of action is. So the Plant Disease Diagnostic Clinic at pddc.wisc.edu helps us with that, helps provide information on plant diseases and their control. I'm also going to show another thing that's on that website that is really useful for you or for the homeowners that you work with to help learn a lot of information. Next, we have the Insect Diagnostic Lab. That is also a diagnostic lab that focuses on insects and arthropods and spiders. So, and insect damage material. So sometimes I get questions about, they might see that the leaves on a certain plant look like they're diseased, but it's actually caused by insects, or, vegetable problems and things like that. So insects aren't just related to the vegetable garden, though. We see those problems in perennial gardens and trees and, of course, Japanese beetles and all those things too. So our insect diagnostic lab can also help identify the insect and determine the proper course of action, or if we need to do anything. Sometimes we don't need to spray or use any type of management. So it just kind of depends on what the problem is. The Turfgrass Diagnostic Lab is great for any lawn or turf related problems. They help provide information and management recommendations. So not just at golf courses and things like that, but also our residential lawn problems. So great information, and they also accept samples to determine if there's a disease problem. I will say that I think their statistic of most of the things that they see that are problems with turf are not disease related. It is problems because of overwatering or not cutting properly, and more management type things, more of our cultural management of how we're taking care of our lawns, and are not disease or insect related. Although it looks like that as soon as the turf starts to fail. So again, really good management of our landscapes is going to help with problems in the future. And then we do have a soil testing lab, the UW Soil and Forage Lab. I recommend that everybody test their soil, especially before planting, but even during it and every few years. This really helps provide recommendations for what amendments that we can apply to improve soil. So a lot of times people call me because things are failing in their yard and they think that they can just, you know, put something down in the soil to make it better. Well, that's not necessarily true. We really need to do soil testing to determine what to apply to our soil. So I mentioned the pddc.wisc.edu. If you go to that website, on that top menu is this link to fact sheets. They have a listing of almost 300 fact sheets of insect related ones, disease related ones. What's great about these fact sheets is that it will tell what it is, what the problem is, what does it look like? So what symptoms or signs are you seeing in the landscape, what the cause is, and then what to do about it. And how to maybe avoid problems in the future. So these are great. I use these fact sheets every day in my work. They're a great resource. They are all available online. You can download them. They're available to look at on a website. So however you need to access them, I'm happy to send them to people as well. So a great resource there to help identify and determine what to do about problems in the landscape. Okay, so not all my work is problem related either. So a lot of times we'd just like to provide some education, and Faye mentioned this upcoming webinar about taking action to keep our lakes healthy. And this is around those targets, invasive species of lesser celandine, non-native Phragmites, and Japanese knotweed. So we are going to hear from Ann Pierce, who is a specialist with Extension and the Great Lakes Early Detection Network. And she's going to help us learn how to identify them, what the impacts are of these invasive species, and then how to manage them and what to do. So we'll send that link out. I think Faye and Josie said they're going to send out a follow-up email so we can make sure you have that registration link. That's going to be a Zoom meeting just like this one. A great one coming up from Dr. Mark Renz is about weed management when establishing pollinator plantings. So I don't know if any of you are involved in kind of these bigger restoration projects where we want to establish a pollinator area. A lot of times people don't talk about what happens after you establish it. There's going to be weeds and there's going to be those types of things we need to manage. So Dr. Mark Renz is a weed specialist at UW, and he's going to share a lot of insight and some research that they've done about how to manage these pollinator plantings, especially for weeds. So do you mow them, and how often do you mow them? Do you use herbicides? You know, all of these things and how to do that. So that is during the day on Wednesday, March 31st next week. Again, that's going to be registrations required, but it's going to be more of a webinar format. So you won't have your cameras and microphones and things like that. This is another great one coming up related to pollinators on April 6th, plant selection and garden care. So we have Susan Carpenter from the UW Arboretum that's really going to talk about sustainable gardening practices, which plants to select to attract and support diverse pollinators. Pollinator gardens is always a great topic, and it's always a hot topic. People want to plant pollinator gardens to support our pollinators. So it's a great thing to add to any yard, really. So this is going to be really a good one too. I want to mention another one coming up in April about jumping worms. I don't know if any of you have had experience with jumping worms or your clients asking about jumping worms. They are most definitely in Walworth County. And if you've never heard of them, I encourage you to start learning about them. We are going to have this webinar again during the day to, try to get you folks here too, but this is going to be another webinar. These are all free. So jumping worms are a type of earthworm, but they're really invasive and they spread really, really easily. So not just spreading by soil or mulch or bringing new plants in, but also on tools, on the bottoms of our boots. And there, unfortunately, is no way to get rid of them. The only thing that we can do is try to keep preventing their spread. So cleaning our boots after we leave a site or before we leave a site, cleaning tools, cleaning any equipment, making sure we're using compost that has been heat treated or reputable sources for mulch and soil and things like that are the only ways that we can stop kind of, or at least slow the spread. They spread really easily and they cause a lot of damage in our gardens, in the landscapes, in forested areas, all of it. They can really cause a lot of impact and damage. So again, I'm with Division of Extension, so we do have upcoming events, and because a lot of things are virtual now, you know, there's a lot of access to things that you can log into a Zoom webinar, and even if I'm not hosting it, maybe someone from somewhere else in the States hosting it, and really valuable information. So we can go to the Division of Extension calendar of events website. Also, our hort.extension.wisc.edu site has all that information I mentioned, events, the fact sheets, links to articles and resources, and also all those other things about planting guides or anything really. There's resources for anything horticulture and gardening related. And of course, you can contact me directly with questions. My email is there, and I'm happy to help answer questions or, you know, point you in the direction that you need to go. So thanks again for this opportunity to connect with all of you. And that's all that I have.
So, does anybody have any questions? Any complaints? Any suggestions? Want to know where your permit is? I will tell you that we have been swamped with projects, plan reviews, and permit applications. I think of the 22 years that I've been here. Last year was our largest workload ever with permits. People, I think, are staying at home and want to improve their properties, want to improve their gardens, and are making those improvements so they can enjoy staying at home. So I know if we're busy, that means that all of you are busy, and we're doing our best to get permits out. But we depend on you to have complete applications. Sometimes the property owner will say, oh, I'll take care of the permits, which kind of causes us great pause because they're always incomplete. They're never got all the information we need. So when you're working with your customers, step up and say, we'll do the permit for you because we know that you're going to get it complete. And then we can get that project out the door rapidly if it's complete. We're finding, I think there is a big renaissance to put in pollinators, do rain gardens, native plantings. And over the years, I see this being more important to people because people that live on lakes, they're outside all the time and they want to make sure that they're having good lake management practice, which means on their property. And so we're, hoping to have a successful year this year. I hope you do. We're ready to help in all that we can, do all that we can. So I'm open for listening to complaints or suggestions. We make changes based on what you recommend. So if anybody has any comments, raise your hand, unmute yourself.
Yeah, there's a question from Miles. I think, Miles, you can go ahead and unmute.
Thanks, folks. I wish I was more technologically savvy and knew how to swap this onto my screen. So I'm hoping that this will at least give us a better understanding of what I'm talking about. These are tetrapods, which are a new and novel form of breakwall that's been used to great extent in low-lying areas around tsunami flood zones, particularly in Asia, as they are a low-cost and readily available feature. I think they're kind of cool. They have a very different and brutalist architectural aesthetic, which granted is my personal preference and doesn't really fit with a whole lot of central Wisconsin, but they have shown to be really effective at mitigating erosion and damages that break walls can't handle, or sorry, waves that break walls can't handle. While Delavan is, paradise. Unfortunately, we have a lot more boats with a lot bigger engines, and they're kicking off these really fun and cool wakes like to play around with. Unfortunately, like the erosion right at the lakefront is really measurable, and it's destroying. It has destroyed my break wall, and it's very clear that structure isn't going to hold forever, and that what we have presently around the lake, because it's sort of hodgepodge and every property owner has their own different set, is there, other than a rock wrap, which is a more natural version of tetrapods and similar structures, what can I do, or is there a possibility to build in my own sort of break wall, or even effectively I took single columns, much like they have in Lake Michigan, in Chicago, along the waterfront, to try and break up the resonance and the force that is getting kicked at the shoreline, especially every Saturday and Sunday. And the lake has to try and quiet down during the week. And then like just as everything's like settled down, okay, great, you get hit again, and we get a lot of silt throughout the lake. So I'm wondering if that's possible. And I know there are a lot of landscapers on here. If those sort of new and novel concepts and constructs can be initiated and used, and how difficult that might be, because frankly they work, and we don't have tsunamis, but we do have lots of people on pontoon boats. So
Well, I've been around the lake, Lake Delavan and Geneva this spring and last fall, and yeah, I cannot believe the shoreline damage that has been experienced. I think the two seasons. Anything in the water is the direct jurisdiction of the DNR. So anything proposed, breakwaters, shoreline protection, the rock riprap, even biologs placed in the water is the direct jurisdiction of the DNR. We don't have any rules. Our regulations do not apply and cannot apply below the ordinary high water mark. I think this is a good discussion with the DNR water management specialists. The specialist that's assigned to Walworth County is Teresa Alvarez, her supervisor is Michelle Scott. So I think that this discussion ought to be moved with the DNR, maybe recommending assembling a team to look at alternatives, best management practices. I know that it's hard because they're protecting a lot of other rights in the water. Rights to navigation is a big one. And that's primarily what they look at is interference with making sure that you're not interfering with navigation, water quality, fish habitat, scenic beauty. So I think this is a discussion to have with the DNR.
I've got something to add to that too. You had brought this up to me prior, Miles, and I found it so fascinating. So I reached out to Teresa too, and I'm still waiting on a response yet. But yeah, hopefully they find it as interesting as both of us do as a possible new way of mitigating that shoreline erosion. But yeah, we'll keep in touch on that, and hopefully maybe even next year we have an update on different mitigation practices and what the DNR came up with as far as this measure.
Certainly boat traffic the last 2 years. I mean, last year we have aerial photographs of the amount of boats on Eva Lake and Delavan Lake this year was out of control. And unfortunately, there's no way to, regulate that activity. But I know it's boat traffic. And then because we've had climatic issues with the water level and then freezing of the lake. So there's been this this year, ice damage was incredible on Delavan Lake. A lot of seawalls have been broken up. So, that's another issue. I know Delavan lowers their lake level. Most lakes will lower those through the winter. But when they're lowered and you get a lot of, rainfall in the fall or early spring, maybe like, well, not today, but that freezes, that's having a lot of pressure on the shorelines as well. But interesting. I love new things, trying new things. And hopefully, the DNR is welcoming to looking at, what you're proposing. Anybody else? Anybody want to bitch about anything? Come on. You guys do it when we're in a room. We're in a room.
Well, I'll stop recording then, and maybe without it being recorded, there may be a little more
Good
room
idea.
for people to be more vocal, but I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording in case there's anybody that we want to share this with later, or if you missed the first part, you can certainly go back and look at it. So thank you, everybody.